On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Jeremy Whittington. He is the co-founder and CTO of Illuma. We're going to be talking about alternative funding paths. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of people understand traditional paths to getting funded for your startup, and I think those are great. But Jeremy's going to talk to us a little bit about some alternative options and how he discovered them and how you can too. And also he's going to talk to us about how they operate differently. What do you have to do in your startup if you are funded in a potentially non-traditional path? Jeremy, thanks for spending some time with us.
Hey, man, I really appreciate the invite. Glad to be here and look forward to talking about all this. Just a little bit of background on me and my company. So I, as you mentioned, the co-founder and CTO of Illuma, we do voice biometrics, and we provide our service to financial, healthcare, insurance, just pretty much anybody that could experience fraud over the phone channel. So we're heavily embedded in there, and we are able to let people passively identify whether or not the person you're talking to is who they say they are.
Absolutely. Exciting. I mean, obviously this topic, we could spend some time just talking about that alone, but this topic obviously focused on alternative funding methods, means, options. I guess let's kind of talk a little bit about, when we talk about mainstream options, I think a lot of people figure there's go hit up a VC, there's private equity. When we talk about some alternative funding paths, can you maybe just outline what some of those are?
I'll just kind of give you a little bit of the background. So my business partner, his name is Milan Borkar. He's got a PhD out of Georgia Tech, and he has a background in signal processing. So that aligned well with our product on voice biometrics and signal analysis. He was looking for a company to start coming out of, he was working for Texas Instruments at the time, and he ran across the SBIR funding from some of, the people he knew at college. So they kind of introduced him to the program. The SBIR program stands for Small Business Innovation and Research, and it's actually a government program pretty much by any agency that has more than $3 billion in funding a year has to put a portion of that into the SBIR program. And the funds that go into the SBIR program are earmarked for, helping people getting out of college that are, doing their thesis, their master thesis and things like that, to small businesses like ourselves. And the goal, at least my understanding of the goal of the program, is to essentially stimulate innovation, stimulate job growth in the United States. So there's a variety of grants and contracts that they provide, and I'm sure you'll share the links to their website. But on the SBIR's website, there's just a slew of topics that the government is interested in people coming and trying to innovate in, right? So from stuff in agriculture to defense to where our original grant was to help try to fight some of the fraud occurring over cell phones, right? So being able to people spam, like phishing attacks and people calling you over the phone. So that's where a big part of the grant that we went after was for, and we also and that specific grant was through Homeland Security. We ended up really just focusing on building our technology, not only to satisfy that grant and help secure cell phones, but also Homeland Security themselves being able to use our technology to, know whether or not, if you're talking to a government employee, they are who they say they are, right? So it was a really interesting program. And Milan had applied to the phase 1 and won that. And and essentially the process is you find, a contract or a grant you're wanting to apply to. There's like an application, and you pretty much make a proposal on, here's what I can do to help, this. And they have a selection committee. And if you get selected, then there's multiple phases you can go through in terms of funding. So we ended up getting the phase one. That's right when I met Milland. And I actually ended up helping him a little bit on the phase one as we got to know each other. And that was for $150,000 for 6 months. And essentially what the phase one is, you create, a presentation to show that your idea has merit, right? You have to have your research in any intellectual property you might be going after, people from that market segment, chiming in, and you put together, a grant proposal. By the end of the phase one, you submit that to them. And that is the work product for the phase one, at least for the grant that we did. Phase two came right after that, and not everybody wins a phase two. Some people just get a phase one. The phase two we got was for $750,000 for 12 months. And essentially what that was for is taking what we had down on paper and actually building a working prototype and being able to provide that to Homeland Security, right? And, that money allowed us, so the phase one allowed, Millen to quit his job, focus on this for 6 months, kind of get the groundwork going. Phase two allowed us to hire 2 engineers to really build it out, right? So we were able to kind of accelerate our development rather than it being just 2 guys in a garage. Now it's 4 guys in a garage, right? So that helped us hire, a couple people and have funding to do everything that we needed to do. And that was $750,000 for 12 months. And at the end of the 12 months, we would have to deliver the working prototype.
I really like the fact that obviously that funding allowed you guys to move the pieces along, right? As you kind of spoke about getting your co-founder to actually quit his job, put a deadline to delivering it. I guess if somebody is more familiar with the venture capital world, and there's obviously lots of podcasts and lots of content out there about that, so we don't need to worry about that. But you obviously found this because you guys were slightly plugged in, and were aware, or maybe I am misunderstanding it. But and I'd never heard about the SBIR funding. Where do you go find this out? Because I think for a lot of people who might hear this, they're like, I never knew. And I don't know if the government's aware of that, or they're just like, hey, we do our best. But
they're doing their best. I mean, they have representatives come to like in Dallas, I've been to a few of the entrepreneurial, sessions, and they come in and talk about it, but it's definitely not widely known. We got lucky that Milland, the people he knew at Georgia Tech kind of introduced him to the agency. So that was quite helpful. But in general, it's available to everybody, right? So anybody can go on their website and look at the topics that they are interested in, and make a proposal. And it's all over the government in terms of topics that you could go after. So plenty money to be had. I mean, if you think about the amount of money, $3 billion to every agency, they're putting quite a bit in there. I think it's several hundred million that go to this per year.
Yeah, I mean it's sizable. I guess as you were talking about get you enough funding to get to the prototype. Obviously, the government gets to work, test, see the product. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think for a lot of people, maybe it's got to be the right fit for the program, which I think that's one aspect, and then also. Oh, actually, let's talk about that. When you're looking at the program and you're looking at what fits, what doesn't fit, are there certain types of startups that this will lend itself more naturally to?
I don't know about excluding certain startups. I mean, if you have established customers, that actually helps you go further in the SBIR or in the government funding, right? So like after we finish the SBIR phase 1, phase 2, and we did a sequential phase 2, the natural evolution is to start bringing this into larger agencies and letting them use the technology. And they really wanted, us to have a few customers and be a little bigger, right? So, it's available to small businesses, but, slightly larger and definitely medium-sized businesses could go much deeper in government funding or government contracts. What I will say, though, that's important to understand is that there's a lot that you have to do in order to fulfill this, right? So you have to keep meticulous documentation. You have to track everybody's hours. You submit these, reports on a quarterly basis, and if you lie or if you're wrong, there could be jail time kind of stuff, right? So like, it's not just, you don't have all the freedom in the world as you would, just using your own money. But it wasn't too bad, and Millen was really good at keeping everything documented and organized. So our reports were very easy to fulfill, but you have to really pay attention to who you're bringing in, what money that's going to them. You can't use anybody outside the U.S. for any of the development. So they have quite a few guardrails, but if you're working hard, it's not difficult.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly interesting. I guess for a lot of people, if they're thinking about the government being the customer, their stakeholder, how is that? And you mentioned obviously there's some dynamics there. Everything's got to be on the up. You have to use resources here. There's some things that you just mentioned. I think that when you're thinking about a startup and they're thinking about their MVP, they're thinking about getting from the customer, getting that feedback. It sounds like a lot of that stuff is going to be similar. But when you're working with the government, obviously maybe the stereotype is government's slower, they're inefficient. Like having to go through that process of getting MVP to them and work through that. How does that work? How was your experience towards that?
We didn't have a problem with their timelines being too aggressive compared to what we would be doing on our own. So I think all that was great. There was a certain point, and I'll talk about this other program where we got another $50,000 in funding, another government program. But there was a certain point where we pivoted to a different direction, and we still had to fulfill what we had agreed to with Homeland Security. So in a sense, we were building two products at the same time, right? So if you have to pivot a lot away from what the grant is about, which they have flexibility in terms of what you deliver, it's not completely rigid. But our idea, the original grant that we had was to secure cell phones. And we got into a program, this was introduced to us by Homeland Security, called ICOR. It's ICORP, ICOR. And it's actually through the National Science Foundation. And essentially what that is taking college graduates and small businesses like ourselves, and they follow the lean startup methodology from Eric Ries, right? So it was the whole thing was several months, but yeah, it was like 6 months total through all the meetings. But we basically would go and we got an advisor that would help us do customer discovery. So we took the original idea that we had, which was securing government cell phones, and through the ICOR program, when we took it to the market to interview and find customers, nobody wanted it. So we were like, well, okay, what are we going to do, right? Because if you think about it, right, like, do you really need to know? Are you going to pay to know it's your wife on the other end of the phone? Like we thought, okay, sure. Maybe the finance department in a large corporation might care. We talked to like Southwest Airlines, America Airlines, all these people. And I thought it was interesting, but they never really were interested in paying for it, right? Makes total sense securing government cell phones, right? Or them analyzing audio over the voice channel to identify people. So for them, it made a lot of sense, but it didn't really make a lot of sense in the public sector. So through the ICOR program, which is another grant, we were able to find our target area, which was taking voice biometrics and bringing it to the call center and into the financial sector. And it was crazy because, first of all, keep in mind, we're trying to run a business. We're trying to get the product going. We're trying to land customers. We're trying to fulfill the phase, 2 at the time, I think. And the ICOR program is 6 weeks, and you had to interview 100 customers in 6 weeks. That's great if I'm building a phone that I can go and talk to 100 people, in a Walmart, right? But if I'm trying to talk to financial institutions, 100 in 6 weeks was insane. I mean, it was really hard. But it was awesome because through all of those conversations and just through the lean startup approach, right? We were able to pivot and identify a good target segment for our product. So we could have done it on our own and self-funded or bootstrapped or anything, but the SBIR program with the I-Corps program was just amazing for getting us going and getting us what we needed at the right time.
It's very interesting. I think when you mentioned this to me when we first spoke, I actually was thinking, here is a great source of funding. Yes, I figure there's going to be some dynamics you have to go through, but they're probably, well, there's similar dynamics through traditional VC. What happens to the government's, I guess, this grant you're getting, their input, their feedback? Like, obviously a VC doesn't want to have too many opinions. They're pretty hands off. They want to take care of their money. They might be there for advice. They have a strong network, founder network that can help plug people in. When it comes to getting a grant or getting some money from the government to kind of help build your product, are there those support systems in place as well if you're going through that process?
I would say, venture funding and strategic funding has a lot more, business support and introductions, right? The government, the people we work with from Homeland Security were wonderful, and they, did many introductions for us to, the people in our sector. But really, what they're there to do is just to make sure you deliver on your grant, right? To make sure you're not just taking the, $150,000 and sitting on a beach, right? But with all of the introductions they made and helping us get into I-Corps and the funding itself, there's a lot of support there. But when we got into doing venture funding, as well as when we did a few accelerators that I can talk about here, that is where we really were able to hit, the private sector and find, true customers that we would sell the product to. So I'll just kind of mention some of the accelerators we got into. So early on, we got into a Deutsche Telekom accelerator called hubraum, which Deutsche Telekom is T-Mobile in the United States. And they were working on deploying near services to local towers, right? To kind of distribute loads across the United States closer to cell phone towers, right? So at the time, our product was for cell phones, so it made a lot of sense. But Deutsche Telekom was awesome. They flew us out to their events over in Germany and Poland, which was quite interesting. And we got to, basically build our prototype and on their platform and look at, deploying this out on the cell network, right, that they host. So the hubraum accelerator is well worth your time if you need to run any compute loads spread across the country near cell phones, right? So if you have a mobile app, for example, and need to run loads closer to where people are, they have a whole network that you can deploy your compute cycles on. So hubraum was very good. We got a lot of intros to people from that. And then one of the big ones was in Dallas, which is Capital Factory. They're down in Austin. And they helped us by introducing us to a lot of prospect investors. They throw events all the time in Dallas and Austin, and they invested in our Series A. So the two accelerators we did, hubraum and Capital Factory, were greatly helpful as well.
I guess you've mentioned and referenced the Dallas community a couple of times. Talk to us a little bit about that aspect. It sounds like you've attended events, you've done some of that work, you've done some of that due diligence to discover some of these other options that are out there. I mean, maybe tell us a little bit about that.
So there's several communities in Dallas. Addison Treehouse is one, the Dallas Entrepreneur Center down in downtown Dallas, as well as, Capital Factory has a location near Dallas. And, it's great for networking. It's great for finding fellow startups to interact with and help. They bring in speakers all the time. And, Capital Factory invested in us, right? So there's a lot of assistance around the Dallas area.
I like that because I think sometimes, founders are very focused on certain aspects, but it sounds like you actually have gotten out in the community. I'm sure there's similar events, activity, communities within other, larger tech hubs or cities anyway. So I think that's good for people to hear. As you've gotten through this, you've talked to some of the government funding grant methods. You've talked about some of the accelerators you've gone through. Actually, I was just kind of curious. If you were to start all over again, knowing what you know, would you go explore those paths? Is that your first step in trying to see if you can get funded to get the MVP up, or would you potentially consider traditional VC as first option?
If you're working a full-time job and you want to start a company and you don't have a nest egg that you can pull on, it's absolutely great to get out and get going. If you can find a topic that aligns with what you want to build, or truly, I mean, you can even go look at their topics and figure out a product. It's great. And I definitely would do it again. I mean, when I do my next startup, I will absolutely be looking at SBIR and, the SBIR program and just looking for anything I can fulfill there. And one of the most important aspects I did not mention on this is it's non-dilutive funding, right? So they give you this funding without taking equity in your company. So the SBIR program is huge for people getting started. And in total, we took in like 1.9 million in total across all of the phases that we did.
I love it. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned, what happens to equity. Obviously, it's interesting. There's no impact. And, you hear a lot about people with ideas, and there's always a constraint. And obviously, getting VC funding is different, right, than getting these government grants and being part of the programs. There's different requirements, and obviously, somebody can go dive into the SBIR website and figure some of that stuff out. But I think it's a great source. I think you hit the nail on the head. If you have that idea and it matches up, or you're willing to be flexible to take something on because you want to own your own business, what a great way to bridge and not have to say, I can't do it because I can't afford to give up my income. So I think that might be hopefully one of the biggest takeaways for people that are not already entrepreneurs that are considering it. And if they are, this is certainly a great avenue.
Just make sure you like writing paperwork, or be really good at ChatGPT, one of the two.
Well, I think there's, if you're funded by VC, there's requirements there too. So, but I'm glad you called that out. And I was actually, kind of curious in terms of, we've highlighted a lot of the positive things and you've highlighted some of the challenges. Is there something that you're like, listen, you definitely want to know about this. This is something that you only learned about going through the process or program, and be aware, because it all sounds great right now, but there's always some kind of hiccup. You have to be aware of any of those things.
Just get the Lean Startup book, read it, follow it, learn how to do customer discovery. We've had absolutely the most success going to conferences. Like, that's where we found in our first conference, which was Finovate in New York, we found our first customer, our first investor. We joined a credit union association. It was huge. So, and most of our customers that we get, at least so far, we're getting a lot of partnerships now, but most of our customers have come from interacting with people at conferences and getting our own booth at a conference.
Awesome. I love it, man. I never had a chance to cover this topic. I thought it was a great topic. I appreciate you coming on and sharing. Hopefully, it spurs some people to jump on that SBIR website and some of these other funding channels that you've mentioned. Jeremy, if somebody wants to reach out to you, because obviously you've gone through it, you might have some advice. Is there a way of connecting with you to kind of pick your brain on some of these topics you mentioned?
Yeah, just reach out on LinkedIn, and Amir will provide the link. Just add me on there and mention what it's about, and I'll be glad to add you. And if you're in Dallas, we can go grab coffee.
Awesome, man. Jeremy, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Great content.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. All right, that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think, talking about these alternative funding paths and how Jeremy and his startups have kind of been able to get off the ground and get a lot of momentum, and obviously he's highlighted some of the positives, and there's some challenges, but whenever you're borrowing money or taking money on from somebody, there's always those requirements anyways, but you should explore these paths. We'll hopefully include some of the links in there in the show notes. Reach out to Jeremy if you have a follow-up. It sounds like he has the experience you'd be looking for. Also, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.